honorable men. These kings were not just honorable men, but they were prophets. They were nabis from the Anbiya. And they were specifically chosen by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to rule over men. So just as how today you have certain presidents and certain prime ministers of countries in different areas of the world, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala highlights within the Holy Quran that in the previous nations, in the generations that have passed, there have been certain personalities that were divinely chosen, appointed to be king over men. The likes of Talut alayhi salam, the likes of, for example, Dhul Qarnayn. What's interesting is that Talut is not considered to be a prophet, yet he was specifically chosen by Allah. The likes of Dhul Qarnayn, again, there is differences of opinions with regards to his prophethood. The likes of Nabi Dawood alayhi salam, Nabi Yunus. Nabi Yunus, they say that he eventually had a very strong leadership position within his community. Likewise, the likes of Nabi Sulaiman as well. Now, Nabi Sulaiman and the story of Nabi Dawood, father's son, is a very interesting story that has been mentioned throughout the Holy Quran. You find that within the Quran, Allah speaks of Nabi Dawood and how he rose to the stations of prominency and how he developed a strong reputation amongst his people. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then talks about how he inherited or how he became a king over his people and how he ruled amongst his people. Allah speaks about how he was given certain characteristics and certain positions and certain responsibilities he had as a king. What's beautiful is that Allah then begins to speak about his relationship with Nabi Sulaiman alayhi salam. Now there's a rule of the thumb. You find that when you read the books of history, especially when it comes to prophethood and how they behave with the prophets after them, the ulama came forward and they said that when you look at a prophet of Allah, when there is a prophet of Allah and there is another prophet of God who is the successor of that prophet will make it very clear to the people at the time. So you find, for example, there are many different examples behind this. You'll have one prophet, and if there is another prophet who is the successor of the first prophet, they will make it very clear from the beginning. They will not wait until the very end and then announce to the people that this person is my successor. From the very beginning of their prophethood, they will make it very clear that their successor is Fulan ibn Fulan, for example. And this takes place in the time of Nabi Dawood alayhi salam. Nabi Dawood, when Sulaiman alayhi salam is just a small young man, Nabi Dawood publicly comes forward. He turns to his people, his advisors, his wuzara, and he would say to them that Sulaiman is my successor. Sulaiman is my inheritor. Sulaiman will inherit from me prophethood. He will inherit from me wisdom. He will inherit from me my responsibilities as being a connector to Alim al-Malakut. You find, for example, this takes place as well in the time of the Holy Prophet of Islam, sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. The Holy Prophet of Islam, they say he becomes a prophet. He's appointed officially as a prophet by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah says to the Holy Prophet, go into public and spread the message of Islam. What happens? Dhul ashira. وَانظُرْ فِي الْعَشِيرَتِكَ الْأَقْرَبِينَ. Call your close relatives, bring them together, and then announce your prophethood to them. What happens? In the first night, he prepares a meal, they go and they leave. Second night, again, he re-invites them, all of his close relatives, he prepares a meal, they enjoy the meal, and then they cause a commotion, and then they leave again. On the third night, or on the third day, he re-invites them. He prepares the meal, they sit down, and then this is when the Prophet announces his prophethood. When he announces his prophethood, he says, which from amongst you will help me? No one stands except for Ali alayhi salam. When Ali ibn Abi Talib stands up many times or 3 times and says, Ya Rasulullah, I will support you and aid you. What does the Holy Prophet say? As the narrations explain to us, he says, Inna hadha akhi wa wasiyyi wa khalifati min ba'di. You find that the Holy Prophet has just inaugurated himself as the Prophet. He's just announced his prophethood. Within days of his announcement of prophethood, he's already appointed his successor. He's already made known to the people who his successor will be. And throughout the 23 years that comes, the Prophet then announces to the people again and again that Ali alayhi salam will be his successor. Ghadir Qawm is not the only evidence that we choose and we use to prove the successorship of Ali alayhi salam. There are many different evidences that take place even from the first year, from the first days of prophethood. So likewise, Nabi Dawood alayhi salam, when he comes forward, he makes sure to make clear to the people that Nabi Sulaiman, his son, out of all his other sons, will be his inheritor. Now the ayah in the Holy Quran begins to speak about the lifestyle of Nabi Sulaiman. The ayah of the Holy Quran begins to speak about a number of theological aspects and a number of akhlaqi aspects surrounding the life of Nabi Sulaiman. Let's look at this. The ayah of the Holy Quran which I began with, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions or quotes the words of Sulaiman. He says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim wa qala. Sulaiman says, رب اغفر لي وهب لي ملكا لا ينبغي لأحد من بعدي. Sulaiman comes forward to Allah. He says, Ya Allah, forgive me, forgive my sins, and grant me a kingdom that no other person has ever been given, and no other person will ever be given after me. So now a number of questions arise. They say, aren't prophets infallible? Aren't prophets infallible? Can they, for example, commit sins? If they cannot commit sins, as it is part of our aqidah, the prophets can never commit sins because of their knowledge of the ramifications of sins, then why is it that Nabi Sulaiman comes forward and he says, Rabbi ighfirli, Ya Allah, forgive me? What did Nabi Sulaiman do that he turned to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and he sought forgiveness from Allah? And the second question with regards to tonight's discussion, why does he pray for mulk? Isn't mulk something that is detested in the religion of Islam? When we turn to the biography of Ali alayhi salatu wassalam, we see that the Imam alayhi salam divorces dunya. He doesn't have good things to say about dunya. Even within the Holy Quran, Allah says that dunya is lahwi wal la'ab. It's a plaything for human beings. There's a very negative, strong negative connotation when it comes to dunya. Why is it that the Prophet of Allah prays for dunya? Why does he say, Ya Allah, grant me a kingdom that no other person will ever have and that no other person has had before me? Does this not go against the ethos of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam? So let's discuss these two areas. With regards to the first question, why does Nabi Sulaiman seek forgiveness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? You find that there are two narratives as to what exactly took place for Nabi Sulaiman to seek forgiveness. One of it is laughable. One of it is completely rejected. The other one is something that is accepted, and it's something that is based on the ahadith of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam. With regards to the first narration, they say that one day Nabi Sulaiman alayhi salam, as he was the king, they say he used to possess a ring. We've heard about the ring of Nabi Sulaiman, yes? It says Nabi Sulaiman had a ring, and this ring was the ring of power. It says that whenever he would wear this ring, there would be certain powers that would be given to him. This ring of power allowed Nabi Sulaiman to control the jinn, to control his enemies, to control the birds, to control the animals, to control the insects, and so on and so forth. All of these wonderful powers that were given to Nabi Sulaiman alayhi salam was because of this ring that he used to wear. They say, according to the narration, they say one day he goes to the washroom, he goes to the loo, and before he enters the loo, he takes this ring off and he gives it to one of his servants to hold. And he goes into the lavatory and he does what he needs to do. They say a jinn came towards one of these servants that possessed the ring. He duped this servant, he fooled the servant, snatched the ring from him and disappeared. All of a sudden, this shaitan, this devil or this jinn wore the ring of Nabi Sulaiman. And when he wore the ring of Nabi Sulaiman alayhi salam, he had all of this power that Nabi Sulaiman had. And he came towards the throne of Nabi Sulaiman alayhi salam. He came and he sat on the throne of Nabi Sulaiman. He usurped the power of Nabi Sulaiman alayhi salam. When Sulaiman came out of the lavatory, he sees that his ring is gone, and along with it, his power is gone. All of a sudden, all that prestige and majesty that Nabi Sulaiman had was taken away from him. He then leaves the palace and he begins to travel. He sees that he's lost everything and he travels. This jinn who's usurped the power and the position of Nabi Sulaiman alayhi salam, they say he disguised himself as Nabi Sulaiman alayhi salam. So people thought that Nabi Sulaiman nothing's happened to him, whereas the real Sulaiman has left. So this jinn who has now disguised himself as Nabi Sulaiman sits on the throne. Months go by, they say, the narration explains, that this person or this jinn begins to act very abnormally, not like how Nabi Sulaiman would act. His close wuzara, his close advisors, they began to question Nabi Sulaiman. They said, hold on a second, you're very different, your akhlaq is different, the manner in which you speak, the manner in which you walk, it's very different. What's happened to you? So they start to question as to what's happened to Nabi Sulaiman alayhi salam. They came towards his servants, and his servants said, yes, he acts very differently. He's more harsh, he's more rude, he's more this, he's more that. He's very different. They came towards his mother, and his mother testified. She said, yes, I've seen that my son is not my son anymore. He's very rude, he's very abrasive. He goes against my commands, he goes against my wishes. He used to respect me, now he no longer respects me. They came towards his wives, and his wives testified. He said that Nabi Sulaiman was a person of mercy, a person of great respect, even within the bedroom, yes, in private chambers. But now he's very rude, is abrasive, is this, is that. So the people began this investigation as to who is this person, because it seems that he is not Nabi Allah Sulaiman alayhi salam. His akhlaq is very different to how the akhlaq of a prophet of Allah should be. This jinn realizes that, hold on a second, the people are catching up. And he felt scared for his life. So what he does is he escapes the throne quickly. He goes to the river, he takes the ring, he throws message of Islam. So you find that from this perspective, with regards to this narration that Sulaiman had this ring and he was subdued by this ring, and this ring went into the hand of the shaitan who then sat on the throne of Sulaiman alayhi salam, all of that is fabrication. So what really happened? The narrations of the Ahl al-Bayt explain that Sulaiman, when his father Dawood passed away, he inherited everything. He inherited all of the power that his father had. Nabi Sulaiman alayhi salam had everything. He had dunya, he had akhirah, he had prophethood, he had kingship, he had everything you can imagine. When you're at that stage where you have everything, when you're of that age, you then want to leave behind a legacy. You want people to inherit from you. The older you get, usually, you want to then start off a family. You're ready to take on that responsibility. The signs of maturity, the signs of wisdom is when you're capable of taking on that responsibility. So you get married. Then you have children. Then you are more willing to be part of your children's lives. When a person walks away from his family, we shun them in society. Why? Because they have accepted to take on a responsibility, but now they have thrown back that responsibility and they care not for that responsibility. That's why they are madhmoom. That's why they are dispraised by the people in society. Sulaiman alayhi salam, he had wives, he had dunya, but now he wanted sons. So he begins to plan. How you and I plan, for example, in our lives. He begins to plan. I'll have a son, I'll have 3 sons, I'll have 7 sons, whatever the number is. And I'll send one to be the governor of this area, and I'll send the other one to be the governor of this area. I'll send the third to be the governor of this area. He begins to plan his future, which is normal. It's perfectly normal for us to plan for our future. He begins to plan. The only thing that he left out was that he did not turn to Allah and say, Ya Allah, insha'Allah. This is according to the ahadith. In that moment, he planned his life, but he did not think about Allah the way Allah should have been thought by Nabi Sulaiman. So he may have thought of Allah, but not to the level that Allah had wished. Is this considered to be a sin? When you perform something, when you plan something in your life and you don't remember Allah, is that seen as a sin? We say, no, it's not considered to be a sin. It's not guna. We're not punished for planning our lives and not saying inshallah. It's not the best thing, but it's not considered to be a sin. But the prophets of Allah, because of their proximity towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they recognize it to be a sin. Not that they deserve punishment, but they deserve to turn back to Allah in regret. So, what happened was, they say that Sulaiman impregnated one of his wives, and he was very happy. He was happy that that wife will give birth to a son. When the time of the delivery came, his wife delivered the baby, but unfortunately the baby was what? The baby was a stillborn. The baby entered this dunya as a mayyit. So the servants, they came, they took the infant and they placed it on top of his throne. When Sulaiman entered his palace, he saw something on top of his throne. He came and he saw the body of his infant. The ayah of the Holy Qur'an explains, he says that when Sulaiman entered his throne, he saw a body on his throne. When you refer to the first translation, when you refer to the first interpretation, you'll find that majority of the Sunni interpretations today, Ibn Kathir, many of the recently translated of the Holy Qur'an, translations of the Holy Qur'an, they'll say that a jinn sat on this throne. When he entered his throne, he saw a body on his throne. Yes, when he entered his court, his palace, he saw a body on his throne. The first interpretation is that a jinn sat on his throne. We reject this. The second interpretation is that the infant was on his throne. They came and they placed the stillborn baby on the throne. He came and he cried. He lamented. He was waiting for so long to have a child. When a child is given to him, it is given to him as a mayyit. He begins to think, what did I do wrong? Where did I go wrong? Then he realizes, I planned everything in my life, but I did not turn to Allah and remember Allah the way I should have remembered Allah. He then turns to Allah. He says, Rabbi ghfirli, forgive me. Yes, I didn't commit a sin. I performed what was known as tark awla. Tark awla means what? When you have two options, one which is good, and the other is better than the first. Nabi Sulaiman alayhi salam planned without remembering God. What would have been better? If he had planned with the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He never committed a sin, but he treated it as if he committed a sin. So he turns to Allah, he says, Ya Allah, forgive me for my deficiencies. Then he asks for a dua, a very phenomenal, powerful dua. He says, Rabbi ghfirli wa habli, and grant me, give me, mulkan, a kingdom, la yanbaghi li ahadim min ba'di, that not a single human being has been given after me. And no human being will be given the same intensity of that kingdom other than me. Isn't this selfishness? If I turn to Allah and say, Ya Allah, increase my wealth, but don't make sure that no one has that same level of wealth or the same intensity of wealth that you give me. Isn't this a level of selfishness? So now a question arises. Why did Nabi Sulaiman alayhi salam ask for this particular dua? Considering that this goes against the ethos of the Ahl al-Bayt alayhim salam, when they explain to us in many different narrations that a person should never be attached towards dunya. Here the ulama came and gave 4 reasonings. The first reasoning was from the likes of Az-Zamakhshari. Az-Zamakhshari, famous Sunni historian, as well as Mufassir of the Holy Quran, he comes forward and he says the reason why Sulaiman alayhi salam prays for a kingdom is because his mu'jiza was the kingdom itself. It's a very beautiful interpretation. Very beautiful interpretation. He says, look at Sulaiman. Sulaiman was royalty. He was born within the palace. He was the son of Dawood alayhi salam, a king who was a king for many, many years. When Sulaiman was born, he was born within the palace. He was raised within the palace and he died in the palace. Sulaiman was royalty. The way we have the royal family today, Sulaiman was one of them. Sulaiman was also a prophet. Now, within the religion of Islam, we believe that the prophets of Allah are given miracles which are exclusive to them, considering the circumstances that they live in. Musa alayhi salam was given the miracles of magic because he lived at the time of magic. Isa alayhi salam was given the miracles of medicine, reviving the dead, curing the sick, those who have leprosy, for example. Why? Because he lived in the time when medicine was prevalent. Likewise, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi was given the miracle of the Qur'an, linguistical power. Why? Because the people were poets and poetry was very strong in his time. So Allah makes sure that the miracle of the Holy Prophet has to do with some sort of poetry as well. The Quran is the best form of poetry. So you find here Nabi Sulaiman alayhi salam was royalty. He was a king, raised in the house of a king. His mother a queen, his sisters and brothers princes and princesses. Allah made sure that Allah made sure that the miracle that he gives to Sulaiman is to do with some sort of kingship, the power of leading an empire. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala enhances his wealth, enhances his dunyawi aspects. This makes Sulaiman different from all the other kings in his time. When Bilqis came towards Sulaiman and she saw the power and the beauty of his kingdom, she realized what? She realized that Sulaiman is a prophet of Allah. She saw that what she had back home in Sheba was nothing compared to what Sulaiman has. She realized the power and the authenticity of Sulaiman, so she came towards the religion of Islam and she embraced Islam. Simply by looking at the kingship of Sulaiman, the power, the physical aspects of his power. So here Zamakhshari says that the reason why he prays for this particular is to prove to the people that his mu'jiza is the mu'jiza of wealth and power and prestige to bring people towards the religion of Islam. This brings us to the second reasoning. The second reasoning as to why Sulaiman prays for mulk is to show people that it is not an end in itself when you seek dunya. It is a means to an end. Whenever we turn to Allah and say, Ya Allah, increase my wealth, it is not so that we become rich and powerful within dunya. It is to make sure that others come towards the religion of Islam. We use wealth, we use the bounties that Allah has given us to invite people towards Islam. Sulaiman's mission as a prophet was to invite people towards Islam. And the best way to do that was to invite the other empires towards Islam. How do you invite the other empires towards Islam? By proving to them that your wealth is far greater than their wealth. Nabi Sulaiman had one vision in mind. People naturally are slaves of this world. Imam Hussein alayhi salam mentions, yes, we mentioned this hadith yesterday, Inna an-nas abid ad-dunya, that people are the slaves of dunya. Sulaiman wanted to liberate mankind and say to them, rather than being slaves of dunya, become slaves of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Look at this wealth that I have. Huh? It is used specifically to invite people towards the religion of Islam. Sulaiman's method of tabligh was through his wealth and his power, physical power, the power of authority as a politician, as a king. So Sulaiman made it clear as his mission statement that man, you should never be slaves of this world, rather you should become slaves of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What's beautiful, today we have the new atheistic movement. The likes of Dawkins, the likes of Sam Harris, for example, publicly they come forward and they say, why should I adopt a religion where I become slave of a God? Why should I follow a God who wants me to bathe in a specific way, who wants me to pray 5 times a day, to put my forehead on the ground? Huh? The idea of being a slave is something that we detest. Why do we detest it? Because of what mankind has done in history. The only reason why we have such a nasty depiction of slavery is because of what the West have done all those centuries ago. Slavery exists even today. And because of its strong negative connotation, whenever we speak about slaves or slavery, we have a strong detest towards it. Islam comes forward and says that when you are a slave of Allah, you have truly liberated yourself. You have freed yourselves when you only become a slave of Allah. In fact, the Quran comes forward and says that every single human being is a slave. Who you are a slave to is your choice. You are either a slave to your own desires. Today you may see yourself as a free person. You're not free. You're a slave. Who are you a slave to? Are you a slave to your own desires, or are you a slave of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? If you're a slave to your own desires, Allah says in the Holy Quran, أَرَأَيْتَ الَّذِي اتَّخَذُوا إِلَهُهُ هَوَى. Have you not seen those who have taken their desires as gods? There are people who take their desires as gods. But then there are those who take Allah as lordship. There are those who become the slaves of God. Look at Qambar. Qambar was the slave of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. And he was proud to be a slave of a human being. When Hajjaj ibn Yusuf al-Thaqafi imprisoned, he took Qambar. He said, Ya Qambar, I'll set you free. Just give la'ana on Ali ibn Abi Talib. He says, you want me to praise the one who you want me to dispraise the one who deserves only praise? He says it will never happen. A short dialogue takes place between him and Hajjaj ibn Yusuf al-Thaqafi, and Hajjaj kills him. The reason why he kills Qambar, the slave of Ali, is because of Qambar's love for Ali alayhi salam. And he was proud to be the slave of Ali alayhi salam, and he was killed for it. There are people who used to love being the slaves of the Ahlul Bayt. Imagine being the slave of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In Tashahhud, what do we say? Anna Muhammadan abduhu. Muhammad is the slave of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The highest stage of a human being is when you are recognized to be the slave of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is good to be a slave of Allah. Sulaiman, his method of tabligh was to invite people through his power, through his prestige, through his wealth, to make sure that the people are not slaves of this dunya, but they become slaves of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The third reason, again, it's a very beautiful reason, is when Nabi Sulaiman, when he prays for mulk, it is to show the people that this world is not just what you and I see, that there is a spiritual association behind the physical that we see. Nabi Sulaiman, sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Nabi Sulaiman explains to his nation and all of the nations that come forth later in history, he explains to them that it is possible for a person to have kingship and not be corrupted. Mankind, naturally, when you give them power, yes, when the power grows, when the power is intensified, slowly you find that he becomes corrupted, and it's natural. خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ ضَعِيفًا أو خُلِقَ الْإِنسَانَ ضَعِيفًا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, we have created mankind weak. That when power is given to them, when wealth is given to them, when this wealth intensifies, when he becomes more powerful, you find that he becomes corrupted. His heart bleakens. Corruption comes when you have power. Look at the politicians we have today in this day and age. The politicians that we have in this day and age, majority of them are corrupted. Why? Because of the power that they have in their hands. The more power a person has, the more corrupted he becomes. Nabi Sulaiman alayhi salam proves to the people that it is possible. It is possible for a person to be a politician, a king, but be a righteous king, a divine person, a person connected with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But this comes under one condition, that that person is someone who is appointed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When Allah says that I have created mankind weak, it means that each and every one of us, there is a possibility, very strong possibility, that if we and our wealth and our power magnifies, corruption enters our hearts. But those who are spiritually pure, chosen by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they will never be corrupted, regardless of how great their power is. Sulaiman was announcing to the people, look at my kingdom. You will not find a single human being that has what I have, ever, until the day of judgment. Because if they do, they will be corrupted. I, as a true divine appointee of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I can maintain a balance of justice as well as having dunya. Amir al-Mu'mineen salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. He says, look at Sulaiman. Sulaiman deserved to be the greatest of all human beings because of the power he had in this world. Yet to even him, he was succumbed to the realities of death. A person deserves the greatest position in this world was none other than Sulaiman alayhi salam, according to what Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam says in Nahjul Balagha. There are evidences to this in the Holy Quran as well. That the more people have power, the more power that people have, the more corrupt they become. Look at the words of Bilqis herself. When Sulaiman sends a letter to Bilqis inviting her towards the religion of Islam, she turns to her advisors, she says to them, she says, what do you advise me to do? Sulaiman says, this is the letter, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, the famous verses of Surah An-Naml. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, this letter is from Sulaiman to the Queen of Sheba, come towards the religion of Islam. She turns to her advisors, she says, what do I do? Her advisors, do you know what they say to her? They say, stand and fight. If he attacks us, we have the military power to defend ourselves. She says, no. She says, no. Kings, when they want to expand their power, they invade and they conquer lands. Today, when you have, for example, one country conquering another, we dispraise them, yes? You have so much, why do you want more? When kings want to expand their power, they conquer lands. When they conquer lands, it's followed by fitna and fasad and bloodshed. Communities and societies destroyed. The economy is destroyed. She says that these kings will enter. Those who are honorable are humiliated, and the entire land is churned inside out. Meaning what? Meaning that all of the resources and the infrastructure are destroyed. She says, I'll test Sulaiman alayhi salam. She sends jewels towards Sulaiman to try and bribe him. Sulaiman dejects these jewels and these gifts. Caravans of hadiyat was sent towards Sulaiman. Sulaiman says, what? You're sending me gifts? I have better than what you're sending me. Take it back. When those gifts were sent back to Bilqis, she realizes that Sulaiman is not a man of materialism. He is a man of his word. He's more concerned about akhirah. He's more concerned about spirituality than the physical nature of this world. So she then goes towards Nabi Sulaiman alayhi salam. The fourth reason as to why Sulaiman alayhi salam prays for a kingdom that none other will ever have was to show the people that no matter how much you have in dunya, you are always considered to be a faqir in the eyes of Allah. Always considered to be a faqir in the eyes of Allah. Ya ayyuhan nas, antumul fuqara. O mankind, you are a faqir in the eyes of Allah. Only Allah is self-sufficient. You find there are people in this world, when wealth increases and their bank balances increase, all of a sudden the arrogance increases. The likes of Qarun, his wealth increases, all of a sudden he says that I am the reason for my wealth. Not Allah. Allah swallows him in the earth, destroys him and his reputation, and he's eternally condemned in the book of the Holy Quran. Sulaiman, regardless of how much he had, he would always turn towards Allah in humility. The Holy Prophet of Islam, he says, on the one hand, Sulaiman, his kingdom increased, his power, his physical manifestations of his power increased. But at the same time, there was one thing that increased as well, his humiliation towards Allah. He would turn towards the stars in the nights, and he would stare at the skies, at the stars, and he would fall on the ground in sujood, in humiliation. The more his power increased, the more his humiliation increased as well. More his ibadah increased towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How did his kingdom increase? How did Allah magnify his power? The ayah of the Holy Quran begins to explain to us the following verse. فَسَخَّرْنَا لَهُ الرِّيحَ تَجْرِي بِأَمْرِهِ. Sulaiman had control over the winds. Winds which were Asifa meaning strong, destructive winds. You know, you have the typhoons and the hurricanes. Sulaiman had control over them. And Roha, winds which were soft. So soft that it makes you fall asleep. Everything in between, from the severest of winds to the softest of winds, Sulaiman had power over it. The ayah of the Holy Quran explains that because of these winds, he was able to travel. He was able to travel on the seas. What would take months to travel, the distances, Sulaiman was able to travel those same distances within hours because of the power of the winds, the control of the winds that he had. He was able to monitor his enemies because of the power of the winds. The ulama came forward and they said, look at Sulaiman, look how prestige of a king he was. He had access to every aspect of his empire. What good is a king if he's just there in one location and is not able to travel to his different areas of his kingdom? Sulaiman was different. He was a king, he had authority over his nation, and he could go wherever he wanted. That restriction was not given to him. So the first area of the magnitude of his power was he had power over the winds. Then Allah says, وَالشَّيَاطِينَ كُلَّ بَنَّاءٍ وَغَوَاسٍ. That the jinn, the shaitan, the shayateen, they were under his authority. He had absolute control over the jinn. These jinn, what would they do for him? Two things. Number one, they would build. Construction, laborers. These jinns, they would construct mighty forts, the beautiful of palaces. They would build homes for their citizens. The empire that was built for Sulaiman by the jinns was something that the world has never seen before. You see, when you compare human beings with jinns, physically, the jinns don't have the limitations that we have. The jinns are able to freely move about because they've been created by fire, whereas we've been created by clay. So many of the physical restrictions that we have, the jinns do not have. So when Allah says that they used to build for Sulaiman, it means, imagine their form of construction. We know what our forms of constructions are. When you look at certain metropolitan cities and how we're able to create skyscrapers going miles towards the skies, imagine what the jinns are capable of today. Today, there are certain artifacts within this world, certain buildings in this world, certain landscapes in this world. It has baffled the minds of archaeologists. They said these are thousands of years old. How did they manage to build certain artifacts like these thousands of years ago? The Holy Quran identifies, Allah says that the jinn used to create for Sulaiman alayhi salam. The physical kingdom, the jinns used to create. And there are no limitations when it comes to the creation of certain things by the hands of jinn. The second thing, they used to dive, ghawas. Dive, what does that mean? It means that they used to dive within the depths of the water. They would go into the base of the oceans and they would extract the jewels and the pearls and all of these different things that you find in the depths of the oceans. When you dive in the ocean, there's only so far you can go. Because of the pressure, the intensity of the pressure, there's only so far you as a human being can go. We human beings have limitations, physical limitations. These limitations don't apply to the jinn. The jinn were able to go deep into the oceans. And because Sulaiman had control over the jinns, whatever treasures they would extract from the depths of the oceans, they would come and they would give to Sulaiman. And this would enhance his power and his kingship. Today, we're sending probes to Mars. We're sending probes to space. Yet at the same time, 90% of our ocean is still yet to be discovered. We don't even know what's there within our own oceans. 90% of it is still unknown. We're sending probes to other planets. We don't know what's there within our own planets. The jinn used to take and give everything to Sulaiman alayhi salam. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that there were certain types of jinn that were considered to be the enemies of Sulaiman. Enemies! What was their role? How did Sulaiman have control over them? They would be shackled in chains. They would be shackled in chains. That was the demonstration of the power of Sulaiman. You don't have any job except being imprisoned. We have power over you. What does that mean? It means that the shayateen, they did not roam in this world freely. There was absolute peace in the kingdom of Sulaiman. The shaitan could not deceive mankind. They could not move mankind away from Allah. There was peace within, spiritual peace within the kingdoms, because the shayateen were shackled by Sulaiman alayhi salam. But there is one particular concept and aspect and character that was very well known for Sulaiman. That despite all of this power that he had, Allah says, Hada, this is ata, we have given this to you. Sulaiman would turn to Allah and he would perform shukr. And he would turn to Allah in gratitude. There are certain people in this world, his wealth increases, he moves away from Allah. He thinks he's on the same level as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Sulaiman, despite the entire world that was given to him, he would turn to Allah, he would say, Shukr alhamdulillah. He would turn to Allah in gratitude, in thankfulness. One of the greatest characteristics of Sulaiman alayhi salam was that the world never corrupted him. The world did not have a control over his heart, he had control over his wealth. When you then turn to your minds towards the likes of Hur ibn Yazid al-Riyah, the likes of Umar ibn Sa'ad. They say Umar ibn Sa'ad, when he was summoned by Ibn Ziyad, he says, Umar, go towards Karbala and slaughter Abu Abdullah, I'll make you the governor of Ray. Umar ibn Sa'ad, do you know what they say? What he said, he comes back and he says, I have two decisions to make. I have two options in my hands. The first option, I can kill Abu Abdullah and become the governor of Ray, or I can lose that governorship. He says, you know what, I'll go slaughter Abu Abdullah alayhi salam, and then I'll come back and then I'll engage in istighfar. And I'll also have the governorship of Ray. That's why he was taken towards Karbala. That's why he chose to go to Karbala and to engage in the slaughter of Abu Abdullah. Dunya corrupted his heart. Then you have the likes of Hur ibn Yazid al-Riyah. They say he was one of the tribal leaders of the Bani Tamim. He was a leader of a tribe, a prestige position. He was a governor within the army of Kufa. There was no one who was greater than Hur ever in Kufa, in the military of Kufa. Imagine if he had slaughtered Abu Abdullah on the 10th of Muharram, Ibn Ziyad, Yazid ibn Muawiyah would have promoted him. Imagine the dunya that would have come towards Hur. But on the 10th of Muharram, they see him walking frantically one side to the other. They see him walking back and forth until one of his tribesmen came towards him. He says, Ya Hur, what's going on? He says, leave me alone. He says, Ya Hur, tell me. He says, leave me. Hur begins to walk towards the camp of Abu Abdullah alayhi salam. This person comes towards him. He says, Ya Hur, where are you going? Are you going to initiate an attack towards Abu Abdullah alayhi salam? Hur replies, he says, leave me, I see myself standing between hell and heaven. I see myself standing between reward and punishment. He takes his son with him. They mount his horse, then they proceed towards the camp of Abu Abdullah alayhi salam. When they approach the camps of Abu Abdullah, Abu Fadl al-Abbas sees Hur and his son approaching. He comes and he says to Abu Abdullah, Hur is on his way. The Imam alayhi salam comes out and he meets with Hur. Hor begins to cry and lament. He says, Ya Aba Abdullah, forgive me, forgive me, forgive me. He says, all of this is my fault, Ya Aba Abdullah. The Imam alayhi salam, look how soft his heart was. He says, Ya Hor, what took you so long? I've been waiting for you. He says, Ya Hor, come off your horse. Hor says, no, allow me to stay on my horse, Ya Aba Abdullah. Let me stay on my horse. He says, why? He says, Ya Aba Abdullah, when I see these children, when they see me, they are reminded that I am the one that brought you in these lands. When your children see me, they become uncomfortable. They know that I blocked you from the Furat. Ya Aba Abdullah, let me stay on my horse. Then he proceeds towards Sayyida Zainab salamullahi alayha. He turns to Zainab. He says, Ya bint Rasulullah, forgive me for my defiance. He says, Hor, don't worry about it. You're with us now. Give your life for Abu Abdullah. He then turns to Abu Abdullah. He says, Ya Abu Abdullah, because of my defiance, let me go to the battlefield. Let me give my life first. The Imam says to him, go. He enters the battlefield and he fights bravely. He calls out to the enemies. He says, Inni ana al-hurru wa ma'am al-dhayf. أضربه أعناقكم بالسيف عن خير من حل بأرض الخيف أضربكم ولا أرى من حيف. He says, I am Hor and I protect my guests. I will strike your necks with my sword and I will defend those who are great in the lands of Haqif. And I will hit you without any regrets. They say he fights. When he fights, he kills many from the soldiers, from the enemies, until one of them came and struck his horse and killed his horse. They say Hor jumped off his horse as a lion. Then he began fighting the enemies with his sword on his feet until they overpowered him. When they overpowered him, they struck him and they killed him. In his final moments, they say Hor turns towards Abu Abdullah alayhi salam and he cries out, Assalamu alayka ya Abu Abdullah. The Imam alayhi salam rushes towards Hor. When he comes towards Hor, he sits alongside him. He takes his head, places it on his lap. He begins to clean the blood from his face. Then he begins to recite these words. He says, وَلَا نِعْمَ الْهُرُّ بَنِي الرِّيَاءِ صَبُورٌ عِنْدَ مُشْتَبَكِ الرِّمَاحِ وَنِعْمَ الْهُرُّ إِذْ فَادَ حسينا وجاد بنفسه عند الصباح. The Imam tributes, his tributes towards Hor are wonderful. He praises Hor ibn Yazid. He says, Ya Hor, you're now free in this dunya as well as in akhirah. You are now free as your mother has named you free. After the battle of Karbala takes place, they say Umar ibn Sa'ad, he commands his army. He says, now bring all the bodies and line them in one place. They gather all the bodies of Abbas, the bodies of Ali al-Akbar, the bodies of Qasim, the bodies of Hor and Habib, and all of these different shuhada. They line them in one place. Umar ibn Sa'ad then asks, he then commands, he says, oh, you 10, mount your horses and trample on these bodies. When they mounted on their horses, the tribe of Hor ibn Yazid, they came towards his body and they said, Ya Umar ibn Sa'ad, you will never trample on this body. He is our enemy, but he is from us. He is from our tribe. They take his body away from the rest of the shuhada. One by one, the tribes of these shuhada took their bodies away. They say that Zainab saw what was happening. When they saw the body of Hur being taken away, she begins to cry out. She says, Ya Bani Tamim, you take the body of Hur away, but you leave the body of his master to be trampled by the hooves of the horses. إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون سيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون. سورة الفاتحة مأتم حسين.
Truly free, oh, it is free, free, oh, free, truly free, oh, it is free. Contemplation, deep thinking, oh, saints thirsty while I'm drinking. How can I be so uncaring? Can it be Hussein I'm killing? Free, oh free, truly free, oh, it is free. Free, oh free, truly free, oh, it is free. Free, oh free, truly free, oh, it is free. My being is so empty, deep thinking, Zahra's pearl has no water, yet I'm sipping. Heaven, take me to Hussein, please. Heaven, take me to Hussein, please. Free, oh free, truly free, oh God is free. Free, oh free, truly free, oh God is free. My son, wrap my hands, captive I be. Blindfold my eyes until my Mawla forgives me. Ashamed am I, pray He forgive me. Free, oh free, truly free, oh God is صل على محمد وآل محمد. So it's adhan time, so inshallah if we make our way towards salah. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. أشهد أن عليا ولي الله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. أشهد أن